Hi, I'm Carol from Designer Stencils, and today I want to show you how to use multiple overlay stencils to create a hand-painted look. For those of us that aren't artists, it's very hard to do this by hand, so a stencil really does help you out. Multiple overlay stencils means that there's more than just one part to create your finished design. This one actually has three. I have part 1, part 2, and part 3. We're going to start with part 1, but first I want to put the register marks on parts 2 and 3 so that when I'm ready to put them on, it's easier for me to line them up. So what I like to do is take my part 1, and I like to do it from, actually I like to do it from the top so that my permanent marker ink isn't going to bleed on my finished product. I'm going to take 1 and line it up using my little register mark here and the edges of the plastic. And then I'm going to be taking my pen and just making a few marks in the leaves that are on part 1. And I'll continue to do it for the next flower. I like to get my marks in about all 4 corners if I can, just so it helps me in lining it up and keeping it from being off center. So now you can see the marks that I have drawn from part 1 on part 2. Now I'm going to do the same thing for part 3. I could use either part 2 on top of part 3 or go back to my part 1. And I think I'm going to use that one because it has the nice big leaf cutouts on that. So they'll be easy for me to see when I'm lining the stencil up. Now here I've rolled out my fondant. I'm going to be doing the middle hydrangea stencil today. I've put down part 1. And now I'm going to take my flat end stencil brush. I have my little artist palette and my colors. These are my powder colors. I'm going to be using 2 shades of green. And then for the flowers, I'm going to use 2 shades of purple. So let's start with the lighter color first. There's our light green. And then I'm going to take some vodka, or you can use lemon extract or Everclear, just as long as you're using a clear alcohol. Just going to lightly dip my brush in that and then swirl it around to make a paint. And the last thing that I do is I take a paper towel and I wipe off the excess. That way you have a nice dry brush. Now I'm going to go to my leaves and start doing a swirling motion. Just lightly going around with the color. See how I'm doing a little heavier on the outer edges? I'm going to fill in the leaves, leaving just a little bit of white on the inside of each leaf. And these are just little stems of the insides of the flowers. Look at this. So now I've done my light color all over. Now I'm going to take pine, dip some in here, a little bit of alcohol on my brush. Again, mix my color into the bristles. And then see here, there's a little too much alcohol that got absorbed, so it's very, very wet. So I'm going to go back and get a little more powder by itself to soak that up. And then again, test it off on my paper towel until it's almost dry. And now what I'm going to do is go to the edges, just the edges. And so you can either pounce or just lightly brush it in. This is going to give your leaf dimension. The nice thing about this is if you decide you need to have a little more shading, you can always line the stencil back up and go over some of these parts later. But now let's pull this up. And you can see how part 1 looks. Now let's go on to part 2. Now here's my part 2. And remember how I put my register marks on here? I drew them. This is how you line it up. You can see through the plastic to what I've just done with the leaves. And we're going to line up the black markings with what's already on there. You can also use some of the openings here in the stencil to help you make some fine adjustments to laying it out. Now here are the full petals. So with that, I'm going to do a similar thing that I did with the leaves. I'm going to go all over with the light color. Again, wipe it off on my paper towel. And then just go all over with the pale color. You can even make some light and dark shading just with this color if you'd like to. Now let's go with our darker purple. And with this one, I'm going to take a tiny, tiny brush. Just because I have such tiny flowers, I only want a little bit of this going in the corners. There's the tips of each of the petals. Let's pull this part up. And see, we're getting there. Now we'll take part 3. Again, use our black marks to line up the stencil. And then again, fine tune it by looking at the edges here just to make sure you've got it lined up correctly. And these are the back petals, so I'm just going to take my darker color and fill those in. This stencil also has 3 little dots for the center of the flower. I'm going to go ahead and paint those in. But what I'll do for my final sample is to just use those as little registration marks, and I'm going to go in, I'll just go in with my piping bag and make those 3-dimensional and pipe those in. You could even use a yellow color, that would be really pretty. And one last thing is the veins and the leaves. It's up to you whether you want to use the stencil or paint those in yourself. I'm going to paint them in just a little bit here. And then we take that off. And there we have our hand-painted look by using a 3-part multiple overlay stencil.